Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. This time, we're talking about something I know we all have. Hobbies. Those things we do just for fun or for stress relief or, for ourselves. But have you ever thought about how important it is to be able to actually talk about them in English?
Yeah, it's way more than just making small talk.
Yeah.
Being able to talk about your passions,
Yeah.
Whether it's knitting or kayaking or anything, really, it can help you connect with people. It can help you ace job interviews or even just have more interesting conversations overall.
And that's why we're doing a deep dive today into this guide called Discussing Hobbies and Interests, a complete guide. And honestly, there's some really fascinating stuff in this guide. I was pretty surprised. Like, they even have some unusual hobbies listed. And they even talk about how discussing these hobbies can be different across different cultures.
Yeah, and what's really fascinating to me is that the guide actually starts off with the basics, like vocabulary. You might be thinking, oh, I know how to say I like music. Like, what's so special about that? But the guide makes a really strong case for using more precise language.
Okay, I'm interested. Give me an example.
Okay, so instead of saying I like music, you could say I'm really into jazz or I love going to classical concerts. It paints a much more vivid picture of your interest, and it just makes you sound more engaging overall.
That's interesting. But I mean, wouldn't it sound a little pretentious, like to just start using all these fancy words, especially with someone you just met?
That's where this idea of authenticity that the guy talks about really comes in. It's not about using big words just to impress people. It's about choosing words that really reflect your passion. And, the guide really does provide a ton of great examples for tons of different hobbies, from the common ones like reading and sports to some really niche ones.
Oh, okay. Like what? Give me an example of one of those unusual hobbies.
Well, one that really caught my eye was bird watching. I never really thought of it as a hobby before, but the guide points out that it's super popular in some countries.
Bird watching? Really? I mean, I get that birds are pretty, but spending hours just watching them? What's the appeal?
Well, and that's the question that the guide wants you to explore. It's not just about looking at birds, it's about connecting with nature, learning about all these different species, developing patience, observation skills. And when you can really articulate that why, suddenly you're not just someone who likes birds, you're someone with a passion for the natural world.
Okay, I see your point. But knowing the words is just the beginning, right? This guide also talks about expressing enthusiasm, like making people actually feel your passion when you talk about your hobbies.
Exactly. And one of the best ways to do that is by using phrases that convey, strong emotion. Like the guide gives examples like, I'm obsessed with, I can't get enough of, or even, it's like therapy for me, which I thought was a really, really powerful way to describe the emotional benefits of a hobby.
Yeah. Oh, our last one's really good. It's like saying, this isn't just something I do, just to kill time. This is something that really matters to me. But I also feel like, there's a fine line between sounding passionate and sounding, a little over the top. So how do you find that balance?
The guide actually addresses that. It says that the key is to just be genuine. Don't force it. If you truly love something, that passion's going to come through naturally in your words and in your tone of voice.
So it's all about tapping into that inner spark, that thing that makes your eyes light up when you talk about it.
Exactly. And speaking of going a little bit deeper, the guide makes this really compelling case for not just talking about what you do, but also talking about why you love it.
That's really interesting. But wouldn't it be a little strange to get all philosophical about, say, your love of baking cookies with someone you just met at a party?
Well, you might be surprised. The guide cites some research showing that people who can really articulate the reasons behind their passions are actually seen as more interesting and engaging.
Okay, now I'm really intrigued. So what kind of deeper reasons are we talking about here?
Well, it could really be anything, from stress relief to personal growth to a sense of community. Like, the guide mentions some people find hobbies like gardening or knitting to be really therapeutic, while others get this sense of accomplishment from learning a new skill or even just mastering a challenging technique.
So it's about more than just having fun. It's about really understanding how our hobbies, contribute to our well-being and our sense of who we are.
Exactly. And the guide really does provide a good framework for thinking about this deeper why behind your passions. They even include questions to ask yourself, like, what needs does this hobby fulfill for me? Or what skills have I developed through this hobby?
Ooh, I love that. It's like taking a deep dive into your own motivations and understanding yourself on a deeper level.
And then that self-awareness can then translate into more meaningful conversations with other people.
Yeah.
Because when you can articulate why something matters to you, it makes it easier for other people to connect with you.
This is already blowing my mind, and we're just getting started. I can't wait to see what else is in this guide.
Yeah, me too. And speaking of uncovering hidden gems, one of the coolest sections of the guide is about how discussions about hobbies can differ across cultures.
Oh, yeah. I was wondering about that. Like, if I'm chatting with someone from the UK about my love of football, should I be talking about American football or what Americans call soccer?
That's a great example. The guide really highlights how even seemingly simple hobbies can have very different meanings in different cultures. It points out that gardening is like hugely popular in the UK, which makes sense given their love of nature and all that. And then in Canada, ice hockey is a beloved pastime, which, reflects maybe their embrace of the outdoors and maybe a little bit of that competitive spirit.
So understanding these cultural nuances is really important for avoiding any awkward misunderstandings and having more, insightful conversations with people.
Exactly. And the guide provides some really interesting insights into how hobbies reflect these different cultural values and lifestyles.
This is so cool. I'm already thinking about all the ways I can use this information to connect with people from different backgrounds.
And it goes even further, suggesting that how you talk about your hobbies should also kind of adapt to the specific situation that you're in.
Oh, like how I would talk about my passion for photography with a friend at a cafe is going to be different from how I talk about it, during a job interview.
Exactly. The guide provides some really good examples of how to tailor your language for all these different scenarios, from just casual conversations to more formal presentations. It even includes some tips on how to use your hobbies to highlight your skills and experience in like a professional setting.
Oh, that's so smart. So it's not just about knowing the words, it's about understanding the context and using the right words at the right time.
Exactly. It's about being, a really good communicator and just using your hobbies to your advantage in any situation.
Wow. This guide is jam-packed with so much valuable information. I feel like I'm learning a whole new language of hobbies.
Me too. And I can't wait to just dive even deeper into some of these topics in the next part of our deep dive. So stay tuned.
Okay, so I'm still thinking about all that amazing information about the cultural differences and adapting our approach. But one thing that really stuck with me was that research you mentioned about people being able to explain like the why behind their hobbies. The guide said they were more engaging. Is there more about that in there? Because I'm a little skeptical.
Yeah, it's a good thing to kind of question that. Not every conversation needs to get super deep, right?
Yeah.
But the guide does suggest that it's a really powerful tool to kind of have in your conversational toolbox. Like it actually cites this one study where participants rated people who explained their hobby motivations. They rated them as more interesting, more memorable, and even more likable.
Wow. Okay. So it's not just about sounding smart. It's actually about making a genuine connection. But okay, let's say I'm at a networking event and someone asks me, so what do you do for fun? I'm not going to launch into a therapy session about how pottery helps me process my emotions, right?
Right. No, of course not. The guide emphasizes context a lot. Like in a casual setting, maybe you just share a fun anecdote like, oh, I love baking because I get to experiment with all these crazy flavors. But then like in a job interview, you could connect your love of coding to your problem-solving skills. It's about showing these different facets of yourself,
So tailoring our approach is key. But I'm also wondering, does the guide talk about like the downsides of hobbies at all? Because, sometimes I get so obsessed with a project that I kind of neglect other things in my life. Is that something they address?
That's a great point, and you're definitely not alone. The guide does acknowledge that there can be potential pitfalls.
Yeah.
Like it warns against letting your hobbies become like all-consuming, It stresses that balance is really important. It even mentions this phenomenon called hobby burnout, where that passion can turn into pressure.
Hobby burnout? Is that like a real thing?
It is, and the guide actually gives a couple suggestions to avoid it, like setting realistic goals, not comparing yourself to other people, and just remembering that hobbies are supposed to be enjoyable. If it starts feeling like a chore, maybe it's time to take a step back and kind of, reassess.
Yeah, that's so true. Sometimes I need that reminder to just chill out and have fun. But this is making me think, this guide is really all about self-awareness, isn't it? It's not just about language. It's like a guide to living a better life, like a more fulfilling life through your hobbies.
Yeah, that's what's so fascinating to me, is how this guide connects language skills to personal growth. It argues that like just the process of learning to talk about your passions, it actually helps you understand them better. It's like a journey of self-discovery.
That's really profound, actually. And it makes me think back to something you said earlier about how even like simple hobbies can reveal these deeper insights. Can you give me another example from the guide? Like, I'm really hooked on this idea now.
Well, there's a section on collecting, right? And I think, oh, that's just hoarding, but with a fancy name. But the guide argues that collecting can be a way to connect with history or to curate beauty or even to build community with other collectors. It's not just about the objects themselves, it's about the stories behind them.
That's so cool. I never thought about it that way. It's like each little object in your collection represents like a whole world of meaning. And if you can tell those stories, then your collection isn't just, stuff. It's a reflection of who you are and what you value.
Exactly. And the guide really emphasizes that even hobbies that seem really mundane can actually be fascinating if you can kind of convey that deeper level of engagement. It's like inviting someone into the secret world they never knew existed.
That's incredible. Okay, so we've talked about vocabulary, enthusiasm, the why behind our passions, cultural differences, adapting our approach. Is there anything else in this magical guide? Because I feel like we've only, just scratched the surface here.
Well, the guide kind of wraps up with this section that I think is super relevant for everyone listening, all of our listeners who are learning English, right? And it's about using your hobbies as a tool for language learning.
Oh, wow. That makes so much sense. But like, how do they actually suggest that we do that?
Well, they encourage joining clubs or groups that are related to your hobbies, finding like online forums or communities where people discuss your interests in English, and even just seeking out, movies or TV shows or podcasts that are about the things you love.
That's brilliant. It's like turning your hobby into this immersive English learning experience. And it makes total sense because when you're really interested in something, learning about it in another language doesn't feel like work. It feels like an adventure.
Exactly. And the guide says that this approach can be really effective because you're not just like memorizing vocabulary lists. You're actually using the language in a context that's meaningful to you. It's like it's like a cheat code for fluency.
I love that analogy. So it's not just about, sounding impressive when you talk about your hobbies. It's about using those passions as a springboard to make these deeper connections with people for personal growth and even to master the language.
Yeah. And, the guide concludes with this really nice thought that I think really captures the power of hobbies. It says, when we share our passions with others, we create this ripple effect of connection, inspiration, and shared humanity.
Wow, that's beautiful. It's like saying that our hobbies aren't just about us, they're about our potential to really touch the lives of other people.
Exactly. And, in a world that often feels so divided, I think that's a really powerful and important message. So, dear listener, as we wrap up this deep dive into the world of hobbies,
it's funny, I'm just sitting here and I have this feeling of like possibilities. Like this guide has given us this whole new way to see our hobbies, not just things we do in our spare time, but as like paths to connect with people and grow as people, even like figure ourselves out.
It's true. And it makes me think about this last thought the guide had, one that I think is really important for anyone listening, especially if you felt that little spark of interest in something, but you just haven't actually tried it out yet. Like, what if you explored a hobby you've always been kind of drawn to, but haven't actually taken the plunge?
Oh, I love that. It's like, a challenge. So what about you? What's one hobby you've always thought about, but haven't actually had the courage to try?
Honestly, for me, it's dancing. I love music and I can feel the rhythm, but I've always felt, a little too self-conscious to actually like take a class or anything. But, this guy's really making me think twice about that. Maybe it's time for me to step outside my comfort zone a little bit.
I love that. And think about all the conversations you could have, talking about different dance styles or the history of dance, or even just like the music that really gets you moving. It's like a whole new world of communication.
Exactly. And that's what I find so inspiring about this whole guide. It's not just about being able to speak English better. It's about using language as this tool to connect with the world around you on a much deeper level.
So what about you listening right now? Is there something you've been secretly dreaming about trying? Maybe it's painting, writing poetry, learning to play an instrument, or even something like super adventurous, like, rock climbing. Whatever it is, I really encourage you just take that first step.
Seriously, you never know what you might find out you're good at, what new things you might get excited about, or who you might meet along the way. And hey, maybe someday you'll even be sharing your own hobby journey in perfect English, and you'll inspire other people to go after their dreams.
I love that. And as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with one last thought. Talking about hobbies might seem like such a small thing, but like we've learned today, it can be a starting point for so much more. Connecting with people better, growing as people, and just living, richer, more fulfilling lives.
So keep exploring, keep learning, keep sharing those things you love, and keep those conversations going, because the world is full of all these interesting hobbies that are just waiting to be discovered.
And that's it for this deep dive. Until next time, happy exploring.
And happy conversing.